need some sun. This is embarrassing. Oh my gosh. Today's book is Little Thieves by Margaret Owens. It is actually a fairy tale retelling based off of The Little Goose Girl, which I've never read. I barely recall recognizing that name. I'm just this side of the fence of liking the book. There were definitely times where I was like, we're not done. And then when we got to the end, there were 3 distinct points where I said, why are we still here? Well, basically it was, we could have ended, we ended. And I was over it by then. I knew this was a fairy tale retelling. I didn't know it was of The Little Goose Girl. I don't remember what I thought it was, but it wasn't Little Goose Girl. There is like a standalone sequel. I don't know what it's about. It hasn't been released as of this moment. By the time you see my review, it probably will, which I'm not averse to reading, but yeah, we'll see. As I said, I liked this book. Like if I had to sit down and reread it, I would. It felt like it took forever. So on that note, I probably would wait a minute. And it wasn't exactly as enthralling as I'd anticipated. I thought I was gonna love it right away, and I didn't. It revolves around this girl named Vanja, who, when she was young, she was the 13th daughter of a 13th daughter, and this made her birth mother think that she would be unlucky. So she brought her to Death and Fortune. Death and Fortune was like, well, you know, only one of you is going to leave the forest. And so the mother left Vanja with the 2 lesser gods, and they became her godmothers. This is where I had the biggest issue. We re-meet Vanja, and she has taken on the persona of Princess Giselle. And we learn that Princess Giselle is actually a real person. However, her visage is a farce. Her mother had purchased an enchanted pair of pearls, which changed her countenance. They changed the way she looked. So Princess Giselle is real, but the way she looks is not. And so Vanja, at a certain age, Death and Fortune had given her over to Giselle's family, and she had become a maid for them. It was not a healthy environment. She at one point did become good friends with Giselle, but at the same time, I guess things happened to her and Giselle never stood up for her, which caused her to become bitter towards Giselle. But when Giselle, I think Giselle's 16. And so when she's 15, 16, this older guy comes and he's like, I want to marry you. And so her parents, because I guess, and this is, so I know I said this is something that bothered me. I haven't gotten there yet. But this is something that I had a problem with because she's a princess. But they never really explained what that meant. It's clear that her family does not have money. And this guy is basically of lesser nobility, but he's of more importance and he has more wealth. So it was an advantageous match. So he comes, he's like, I want to marry Giselle, brings her back to his castle or his home, only to then go off and start fighting wars or something. So at this point, Vanja and Giselle have gone down to the river and they're having this conversation. And this is stuff you don't learn till later. So these are spoilers. They go down to the river and Giselle is talking about how she can't do this. This is not what she wants. And Vanja, Giselle has taken off the pearls and her dress because she's gotten in the river. Vanja picks both up and is like, well, I'll take your place. Giselle thinks this is a fantastic idea, but Vanja's like, no, it's not temporary. It's not when it's convenient for you. If you don't want to be in this position, I will be in this position for you. So she takes the pearls, she takes the dress, she transforms into Princess Giselle, and then basically has Giselle kicked out and orphaned and has to fend for herself out in the big wide world. So the problem that I had was that when we get we had that first little fairy tale, and we had a lot of these, and it didn't take me long to realize they weren't actually fairy tales, but it did take me a minute to realize like they weren't necessarily necessary. I didn't like how they were set up as a fairy tale when they were actually depicting Vanya's real life. We go from the little story of her being given to death and fortune to her being Princess Giselle. And what she's doing is she's also a thief, because she wants to save enough money to get out of the realm so she can get away from death and fortune. I didn't know why. Like, I kept waiting to learn that maybe they were mean to her, that they were cruel, or that they abused her, or that there was something specific that they had done that made her not want to serve them, because that is what they were asking her to do, was to serve one of them, to be either like the servant of death or the servant of fortune. But what she had wanted was a parent. And so it makes sense to me why she would harbor ill will against them, because they weren't what she needed. They gave her to a family that abused her, and they never came to her aid. But I had a really, really, really difficult time understanding why she disliked them so much. And then on top of that, it took a minute to understand how the pearls worked. My thought, like, you knew there was something magical about the pearls, that they weren't just a normal necklace. But it takes an extraordinary amount of time for it to be revealed that the pearls are magical and that they change the appearance of the wearer. It's not until after Vanja visits Giselle in the orphanage that she has been living to realize that Giselle doesn't look like Giselle either. Early on, we are told that when she'd gotten kicked out of the kingdom, she had tried to tell people, hey, that's not really Princess Giselle, I am. And I was like, so if it's Princess Giselle, wouldn't they recognize her? And then when she's out on the streets, I was like, why wouldn't people recognize her as Princess Giselle? So there were little things that I thought could have been clearer sooner, and maybe that would have engaged me sooner. In any case, we open with Vanja attending this party at this wealthy home. We go kind of back and forth between her referring to herself in first person and third person, like I versus Princess Giselle. And that was a little off-putting because I couldn't tell what the narration was supposed to be. I didn't know why we were flipping back and forth until a little bit later, and you realize that she's not actually Princess Giselle, but when she's in that Princess Giselle persona, she'll refer to herself in the third person because she's not talking about herself, she's talking about the character she's playing. But she is at this soiree, and she's going to rob them because she wants to amass, what is it, Gelden? 1,000 Gelden. 1,000 Geld. And she thinks this is the baseline of what she'll need to get away from her godmothers. So she's there, and she has committed the theft only for either it's the arrival of her betrothed or the arrival of this guy named Junior Prefect Emmerich, who he's basically the law. He is basically a detective, but they are kind of blessed by the gods. So once he becomes an actual prefect, he will somehow possess supernatural abilities granted to him by this, that, and the other. For now, he's a junior prefect sent ahead, and the real dude is going to come later, and they have been summoned because her thefts, because she is the Finnegeist, and they need to find out who this Finnegeist is. She's able to trick Emmerich, who is something of a buffoon, into believing that she knows absolutely nothing. But he says, I still want to talk to you So she gets out of there. She's like, I'm leaving here. She goes home, but on her way, she is stopped by another lesser god. And this lesser god, it tells her she knows who she is, and she knows that she has stolen something she shouldn't. And that would be a ring. There had been a very interesting ring, which she could not help but take. This ring apparently means that they're acolytes of this specific god. And so this god is like, okay, so since you're super greedy, you are going to be succumbed by your greed unless you can figure out how to atone for all of the things you have done. And Vanja is just like, does that mean I have to give the money back? As a guardian, this god leaves her daughter Ragna with Vanja. Ragna is a shapeshifter. Apparently she was born of her godmother and her human father. So she does have limitations, but she also does have supernatural capabilities. She might be my favorite character because of her naivete. I enjoyed the way that she would point out the obvious because she was basically a child. She didn't know much about human ways. And so she would point things out in a very simplistic manner, but they always had a deeper meaning to them. I kind of expected her to be like kind of a bore, but she wasn't. Vanja is like, okay, so I have my stolen jewels still, and I need to fence them. So she goes to this guy who she had known since before she and Giselle had come to, what's his name? I want to say like, Edelweiss. It's not Edelweiss, it's Adelbrecht, who is the fiance, the older fiance. He was a cook, and apparently he actually wasn't a very good cook, but there had been a player, like a minstrel, who had also served Giselle's family and then had come when they had left. And she had been the one who made his food taste good. In any case, he works basically at a bar, and the first thing that had happened when she had been cursed, a ruby teardrop had formed on her face. She has covered it up, but he's like, there's something going on there. And so when he sees the ruby, greed overtakes him. They get into a squabble. He kind of kills himself. Like, he falls on his own knife. So she and Ragna get rid of him. And then the next day, she meets with Emmerich again. And because he's so bumbling, she is using her wiles to make him uncomfortable, to get around the issue. And then he leaves. At this point, Adelbrecht actually comes back. Her intention is to go find Giselle. So she knew where to find her. And when she went there, this is when I was just like, I was uber confused as to what's going on, because Giselle recognized her as Princess Giselle, but nobody recognized the actual Giselle as Giselle, and she was going by a completely other name. So they get into this physical fight, which is only broken up by the guards. Now, Vanja is given this opportunity to show mercy. And she's like, I'm going to show mercy because it means that Giselle is going to know that I had her life in my hands. And I liked Vanja. I thought she was incredibly smart. And probably my overarching problem with this book is probably more of a reflection of myself than anything else. Although granted, slight spoiler here, it turns out that her being cursed didn't have much to do with her greed so much as another motive. But you go through this entire novel thinking that she is cursed because of her greed. And I'm like, she's not actually being greedy though. She has no way to make money, and all she wants is to escape the thumb of oppression. And so I just kept wondering, like, how is she, when she's not necessarily stealing because she wants more money, how is she going to repay what she has done? I didn't necessarily like the little twist at the end. Maybe if there had been more breadcrumbs dropped about a true ulterior motive for her cursing, then I would have been like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? Or, oh my gosh, it was there all along. But I kept thinking, she's not actually doing anything wrong. Like, yes, theft is wrong, but she's not necessarily doing it for her own gain. She's like, all right, I guess I'm not going to reconnect with Giselle. So she comes back only for Albrecht to show up. And she's trying to talk to him about like atonement. And he's a bad guy. He's the ultimate villain. And I agreed with one reviewer that he was the most one-dimensional character in this entire novel, because you didn't get much of who he was. Like, you understood that he was evil and that he was selfish. And there is a point where you realize that something has changed with him. Prior to the novel starting, looked one kind of way, but now he has changed. But you don't know why. You don't really know what's happened to get him to where he is. So I did wish that I'd had more development on him, especially because he played so heavily into everything. I was just like, but who is he? He's like, well, people don't want money because people with money will only spend it on things that won't help them. So like deeds are, what you should. She's like, oh yes, this is coming from somebody who does neither good deeds nor gives money. So she steals his signet ring, goes and like gives all this stuff away, and then using his signet ring absolves this entire place of people of their debt. And from this point on, he's like, okay, no, you gotta stay here. Like, I gotta keep my eye on you. And also, we're gonna get married in 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks, because her curse, she had 2 weeks until the full moon. So basically, she had 2 weeks to break the curse, 2 weeks to marry him, and then also 2 weeks she would turn 18. We go throughout this novel, and it was well developed. I did enjoy the writing. I thought it was very intelligent. I thought that the movement throughout the plot points made sense. As I said, it took a while, and so that's when I did find myself drifting off, getting bored. I bought the audiobook because I got money for Christmas, and it wasn't a bad audiobook, but I would start it back up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, we're only this far into the novel. So she is bonding with Ragna. She is still trying to figure out how to break the curse. And then she learns that Emmerich is not as much of an idiot as he makes everybody think. He has learned. He knows who she is. He knows that she is the Finnegeist. And this leads into so many other things. He and the actual prefect were not actually summoned for the Finnegeist. Adalbrecht had summoned them to find the Finnegeist, but the overarching issue was they were trying to suss out his wrongdoings. They were trying to figure out how they could summon the godly court in order to convict him and get him punished for things that had been going on around him. Figuring out who she was something, but at the same time, it wasn't why they were there. So even though he knew who she wasn't going to get into any trouble. Little bit of a spoiler, he's the love interest. They do have a very low-key romance, which I liked. I liked that you saw her slowly developing feelings for him. It was really nice, but it wasn't overpowering the storyline. What happened? It was a very in-depth novel. There was a lot of storyline, which I think is why sometimes it felt heavy and slow. Yeah, we'll just jump ahead. She has returned to Giselle, to getting Giselle's help. Nachtmar? So nightmares, and there all these little nightmare things keep cropping up everywhere, and it's to the point that it's obvious that it's not natural. Like, there shouldn't be this many Nachtmaren, and Nachtmaren can kill you, which, apropos, correct? But it's basically like they can feed off your dreams and kill you that way. Giselle and Vanja and the whole gang are at the orphanage, and a Nachtmar shows up. It's stomped out, but it burns down the place. So Vanja brings them to one of Fortune's houses. Fortune is like, oh, you're requesting my help. That means that you're going to serve me. And she's like, no, I'm not, because you being my mother means this is my house as well. And so then they haggle, and she pays for all of these orphans to be able to stay here, which I'm just like, why are you paying for them to stay at your own house? Giselle goes back to Odelbrecht's in order to help with wedding preparations. Her parents also show up, and now we're getting more about Vanya's past and Giselle's past. And there were some reviews that kept talking about Giselle, kept talking about Giselle's development. And guys, this book, it felt like it took forever sometimes. I got to a certain point where I was like, there's no way we have enough book left to bring Giselle into the mix and then have a full-fledged development. But we did, and I liked her. She realized the error of her ways. Eventually, she does stand up for Vanja in front of her parents, and their bond strengthens from there. They work out their issues. They talk through, because Giselle was upset with Vanja for basically stealing her life, and Vanya's like, but you didn't earn this life. You didn't want this life. So they had to talk through their miscommunication, and I enjoyed their friendship from then on. But then we are also introduced to this other girl, Countess Irmgard, who it took me a while to remember who she was. Like, I had a hard time keeping up with names because they were all Germanish and they all kind of sounded the same. Irmgard was sort of a catalyst for the real issues between Giselle and Vanja, because they were getting along very well. I think they're 13, 14, and then this countess, and this is like one of those little fairy tales that we are introduced to in the book. This countess arrives, and she's not nice. She's playing all these tricks on Vanja, which at first Giselle thinks are funny, only to realize that they're going too far. And then when it's ordered for Irmgard to apologize to Giselle, she does so and gives her this ruby ring, only to then accuse her of stealing the ring, and then she gets whipped, for which Giselle does nothing. And this feeds Vanya's hate and bitterness. We have Irmgard woven in and out of here, and there's a moment in which it's revealed that Irmgard is pregnant, and I guess she's pregnant with Odelbrecht's child, and they've been having an affair. What he wants, he has a quest to kind of take over the world. And so he has bound himself to the Nachtmahren. He has Emmerich's mentor, the guy that they've been waiting, the actual prefect, he's had him killed, and he steals his tattoo, which binds him to something else that's magical. What he's gonna do is like just take over everything using these magical abilities, and she's gonna be right by his side. So these are little things that we're seeing. We are also seeing him trying to get Giselle killed. Somehow they know about the pearls. So Irmgard is like, oh, you are supposed to try to kill her. And he's like, but we don't really know it was her, because we know that these pearls could make anybody look like her. There was a lot to unpack, and I felt like it wasn't always done efficiently and cohesively, but we got there in the end. What happens is Scooby-Doo and gang figure out the ultimate plan. And now they have to entrap Odelbrecht. It looks like everything is going swimmingly until it's not. And now Vanja is going to be hung as the Finnegeist. Giselle is going to marry Odelbrecht. There's nothing else you can do about it, only for it to be revealed. And here's the biggest spoilers of all. Ragna has transformed herself into the likeness of Odelbrecht. Vanja and Emmerich have devised a plan for her not to die, and because she's gonna be hung and then like dropped into a barrel of nails. Right as Giselle and Ragna, who have developed a relationship, have said I do, Adalbrecht staggers out of like a meeting house or something. He's like, that's an imposter. And this whole melee ensues, only for him to cast a spell over everybody except for the Scooby-Doo gang, because they have armed themselves against this sort of situation. Vanya is right there on the cusp of death. Like, this is, the curse is taking over and we're right there. Adalbrecht transforms into this, basically this monstrous creature. Emmerich is about to summon the godly court. And the thing about the godly court is, because he's a junior prefect, he doesn't actually have the power to do so. He summons them, he will die. He summons them and they lose their case, he will die. What Vanya does, and there have been moments throughout this book where she has behaved in a way that the gemstones that are taking over her body will disappear. She can't figure out that magic solution, but she knows she's doing something. Although for me, I kind of would like a little bit more of her efforts in that, and of trying to figure out, well, what did I do that I can keep doing that? But she has, with sleight of hand, replaced the coin he needs to summon them with a different one. He thinks that he has summoned the godly courts, only to realize wrong coin. So she repeats what he said so that she has summoned them, because she's dying anyway. So she's like, well, if you're gonna die for summoning them, it better just be me. So they all show up, including her godmothers. The thing is, there is, what is his name? Truth, I think is Truth. And Truth can discern between truth and lies. But the caveat is, it's whether or not you believe it's the truth. So it's not actually whether it is the truth, but do I think what I'm telling is the truth? Both sides seem to be on even footing, but the downside of that is you can't win a case if you're tied. Vanya, what she finally does is she summons Giselle's horse, because one thing that they had found in Adalbrecht's office was the skull of a horse, and she realizes that this has had a whole lot to do with things, and that is how he has bound himself to all of these Nachtmaren. He would never, like, as much money as he has and as much money as he'll spend on certain things, he'll be super cheap in other things. So what he had done was he had Giselle's horse killed, and that is the skull that he had used. So even though this skull that had been part of their evidence had been destroyed, by summoning it, we realize, oh, hey, it's got a story to tell. It tells its story. Adalbrecht is found guilty. There we go. He is then, because his nickname was the Golden Lion, so he is transformed into a golden lion, because it is left up to Vanya to decide his fate. She does to him what had been done to her, which was, you will turn into what you want most. He, I guess, had wanted to be the Golden Lion, like live up to that name. Irmgard goes to jail, where Vanya continues to taunt her, which I just thought was really funny. Basically everybody except for Vanya has moved into Adalbrecht's castle. Now Giselle is, I forget what the term is for her, but she's the ruler. And what he had wanted to do, because he wanted to kill her, and it seems strange, like, why kill your new wife, like, if she hasn't even given you an heir? And because she wasn't yet of age, 17 or 18 or whatever age she had to be, she was his heir, but it was also vice versa. So they signed the wedding documents, so that means that he's her heir too. She will inherit what is his, or he will inherit what is hers. So whoever dies, then obviously since he dies, she gets to inherit everything. So they, she becomes the ruler. Right after the godly court finishes, Vanya's godmothers come to her and are like, so by summoning the godly court, it means you are asking for our help. So now you have to choose. And Vanya's like, crap, I was hoping they wouldn't have picked up on that. Only for Emmerich to be like, oh my gosh, but you're 18 now, so they don't have claim on you anymore. And there we go. She doesn't have to serve either one of them. She gets to do what she wants. She had been almost entirely consumed by jewels. when she called the godly courts. At that point, she basically left her body, and then I guess when she was brought back to her body, but broken of the curse, all the jewels fell off of her. So now she has a ton of money. But we realize, or we learn that she just wants to be with Emmerich. And she just wants him to catch her. And I don't really know if she's going to continue to steal. Like, she basically says, I'll be fine until this money runs out. But yes, I definitely want you to catch me. So we have a happily ever after for them. This was kind of a hard book. I didn't finish it that long ago, but there were a lot of intricacies that make it hard to remember exactly each footstep. If you have any questions, please ask me. As I said, it was a good book. Would I have preferred to have not spent my money on it? Probably, because I don't foresee myself re-listening to it anytime soon. But there was just no other way I was going to get my hands on this book. And I wanted to read it. It was one that I was very excited about reading. I thought it looked really interesting. Is there anything that I'm forgetting? Probably a lot. There, as I said, a lot of intricacies, but that's what you're going to get because it's time for me to go to bed, and I'll catch you later. Bye.